Welcome to World Revolution channel. We're going to deep dive 10 Power Lessons Priceless from William Poundstone.
That's right. And today we're taking a huge shortcut into this world of behavioral economics, pricing psychology.
And we're doing it by pulling out the absolute biggest insights from William Poundstone's book, Priceless, The Myth of Fair Value.
And, of course, how to take advantage of it.
Exactly. And Poundstone, he's really the perfect person to guide us through this. I mean, the man has written over 10 acclaimed nonfiction books. You've probably heard of Fortune's Formula.
And he's been everywhere. The New York Times, Harvard Business Review. He just has this incredible knack for taking apart these complex systems, especially anything to do with numbers.
Right. And he shows you the hidden flaws, the things we all just kind of accept as true.
And the hidden flaw he's going after in Priceless is a big one. It's the whole idea of value itself.
So what's the core premise?
It's honestly radical. He argues that prices are not solid. They're not these fixed logical things based on, cost plus profit.
Yeah.
No, he describes them as slippery and contingent. They're constantly shifting based on psychology, on context.
Which leads to a pretty tough conclusion about us, the consumers.
It does. It means we are fundamentally price clueless. We are just guessing.
We might know if something is more expensive than something else.
Right. The relative part, we get that. But if you ask us what something should cost, what its true, fair, absolute value is,
we have no idea.
We're just making it up. And that just completely shatters the classical economic model of the Homo economicus.
The perfectly rational person who weighs every option.
That person doesn't exist. Poundstone shows that the dollar amount we put on anything is almost always constructed from these little hints and cues in our environment, often totally irrelevant ones.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the first 5 of the most powerful lessons from Poundstone's work.
And we're going right to the source material he uses to prove that pricing is, well, it's more like psychological warfare than a math problem.
Okay, so what are the first 5?
First, we'll get into why prices are arbitrary but also predictable. Then second, how to use high anchors in negotiations to your advantage. Third, we'll talk about loss aversion, why losing hurts twice as much as winning feels good. Fourth, how our idea of fairness completely overrides logic.
And the last one?
And fifth, the incredibly powerful, almost magical appeal of the word free.
This is basically a guide to seeing the matrix, spotting the manipulation, whether you're buying or selling.
Exactly.
All right, let's start with that first really profound idea. Coherent arbitrariness.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this core concept, coherent arbitrariness, it's a bit of a mouthful.
It is. It sounds very academic, but the idea behind it is actually something we experience every single day. It was coined by researchers like Dan O'Reilly.
So break it down for us. What does it actually mean?
It means our preferences are stable or coherent, but the actual dollar values we put on those preferences are totally arbitrary.
That example.
Sure. Think about cars.
Yeah.
You probably prefer a Mercedes over a Honda, right?
Right.
And you prefer a Honda over, say, a bicycle. That order, that hierarchy is fixed in your mind. That's the coherent part.
I know which one I value more, relatively speaking.
Exactly. But then if I ask you, what's the true intrinsic fair price for that Honda? Should it be $20,000? 30?
Hey, I don't really know. I'm just guessing based on what I've seen before.
We're guessing. You're building that price arbitrarily from memory, from ads, from what your neighbor paid. You don't have an internal rational price tag.
And that's the distinction that just breaks the old economic models.
It completely breaks them. Traditional economics runs on what Poundstone calls the Guy Grand premise.
Which is what?
It's from a novel character who believed everyone has a price. The assumption is we all walk around with these stable internal price tags for everything.
But we don't.
No. Research going way back to the late 60s with Liechtenstein and Slovak proved those price tags don't exist until someone forces us to create one. And when we do, it's totally unstable.
Poundstone has this great analogy with the suitcase.
Yes, it's perfect. If I show you a suitcase and ask you to guess its weight, you'd immediately say, I have no idea. You know you're not an expert.
Right. I can't guess the absolute weight in pounds.
But now, what if I ask you to guess the winning bid for that same suitcase at an auction?
Well, I feel like I should be better at that. Price is a public thing.
Right. But psychologically, it's the exact same task. You're just as bad at guessing the absolute dollar value as you are at guessing the absolute physical weight. You're just pulling from different shaky external cues.
And this cluelessness is exactly where the pricing consultants come in.
The rocket scientists of pricing, as he calls them. And they don't try to change your preferences. They don't try to convince you a Honda is better than a Mercedes.
They just manage the perception of that arbitrary number.
Precisely. Which brings us straight to the dark art of shrinkflation.
Ah, yes. My cereal box is definitely getting smaller.
And that's a strategy perfected by fools like Simon Kucher and Partners or SKP. They're a massive global pricing consulting firm.
Tell us that Skippy peanut butter story, because it just perfectly explains how this works.
It's a fantastic example. Frank Luby, a consultant at SKP, laid it all out. Skippy wanted to raise their prices effectively, but without changing the number on the shelf tag.
Because that's the number we all see. That's the anchor for that purchase.
Exactly. So the old plastic jar, it had a flat bottom, totally smooth. The new design, though, introduced this big indentation on the underside, a dimple, they called it.
So it looks the same from the front, but there's less inside.
A lot less. It went from 18 ounces down to 16.3.
Wow, that's almost a 10% price hike.
It's a 9.4% effective price increase. Now, if they had just jacked up the price by 9%, every single regular Skippy buyer would have noticed.
And they would have been angry? Or maybe switch to Jif?
Of course. But by keeping the jar looking the same height and width on the shelf, our brain's alarm system doesn't go off. We judge volume by those two dimensions. We don't pick it up and inspect the internal architecture of the jar.
So we grab it, see the price we remember, and assume it's the same deal. We notice the dollars, not the invisible shrinkage.
It's all about exploiting the difference between what we say we do, like checking the unit price, and what we actually do, which is rely on visual habit. Our memory for absolute prices is terrible.
And Poundstone saw this everywhere. He mentioned Kellogg's doing it with Fruit Loops and Cocoa Krispies back in 2008.
Yep, they just phased in slightly thinner boxes. Again, we see the front of the box, we notice width and height, a tiny reduction in depth. It's basically invisible to us in the moment we make the purchase.
It's such a sophisticated way to engineer our perception of value.
It is, and when they can't shrink the package anymore, what do you think they do?
They introduce a whole new family size or something.
Exactly. A totally new package, maybe a different shape, a different design, and that just destroys our old reference point. Now you're comparing apples and oranges, and it's impossible to know if the new size is a good deal or not.
It feels so cynical when you lay it out like that.
It is, but it speaks to how powerful this is. SPP was founded in 1985. They now employ dozens of PhDs, even theoretical physicists, to figure this stuff out.
And who are they advising?
Everyone. Microsoft, Nestle, BMW, Goldman Sachs. Their whole business is built on the belief that price is the single biggest, most unrecognized hidden persuader out there.
So whether it's peanut butter or a new car, the number is arbitrary. The value is constructed.
And the perception is managed.
Which leads to the next logical step. If the value is constructed, how do you build that first number?
And that takes us right to lesson 2, anchoring.
Okay, so lesson 2, anchoring and adjustment. If the price is arbitrary, then that first number we hear, the anchor, has this huge outsized power over everything that comes next.
This is one of the most fundamental cognitive biases out there. Again, it comes from Tversky and Kahneman back in 1974.
So what's the mechanism? How does it work?
Anchoring is when an initial number acts as a mental starting point. When you have to guess something you don't know, you grab that anchor and you try to adjust away from it.
But the adjustment is never enough.
It's almost always insufficient. Your final guess gets pulled, like by a magnetic force, back toward that original number, even if that number is completely irrelevant.
And the classic experiment to show this is it's almost unbelievable. The rigged United Nations study.
It really is. It shows just how easily our brains can be hijacked. So they had people spin a wheel of fortune,
Which was secretly rigged.
secretly rigged to land on only 2 numbers, 10 or 65.
Okay.
Then they asked 2 questions. First, is the percentage of African nations in the UN higher or lower than that number you just spun?
And the second question was, what you think the actual percentage is?
Right. And the fact that the anchor number came from a random spin of a wheel is what makes the results so incredible.
So what happened?
The group that got the low anchor, 10, their average guess for the percentage was 25%.
Okay.
The group that was anchored on 65, their average guess was 45%.
A 20-point difference.
Yeah.
Just from a random number.
A 20-point difference. And the actual answer at the time was around 23%. So the low anchor was much closer to reality, but the high anchor pulled people way off.
And Poundstone makes the point that this works even with anchors that are just completely absurd.
Oh, totally absurd. He talks about George Quattrone's research where he used anchors that were just scientifically impossible.
Like what?
He'd ask people if the average temperature in San Francisco was higher or lower than 558 degrees Fahrenheit.
558 degrees. I mean, that's obviously wrong. Any rational person should just ignore that number completely.
You'd think so. You'd think you'd just discard it and start guessing from a reasonable place, like, I don't know, 50 or 60 degrees.
But people don't.
They don't discard it entirely. Now, nobody guessed 500 degrees, but the people primed with that crazy high anchor still produced final guesses that were significantly higher than the people given a low, plausible anchor.
So it's an unconscious process.
It's completely unconscious. Poundstone says anchoring is an artifact of guessing. If you don't know the real answer, your brain just latches onto whatever number is handy.
It's a fundamental vulnerability then.
Yeah.
Unless I'm an expert in something, I'm susceptible.
Exactly. And they've even tried to give people an antidote. They ran studies where they explicitly warned subjects about this contamination effect from previous numbers.
And did the warning work?
Not at all. It was completely ineffective.
Wow.
Which tells you this isn't about being lazy or not paying attention. It happens unintentionally. We try to adjust, but since we don't know the true value, we have no idea how much to adjust.
So this translates directly to any kind of negotiation.
Absolutely. Getting your number in first gives you a massive advantage.
And the real estate world seems to be the best laboratory for this. The Northcraft and Neal experiment is fascinating.
It's crucial because it tests whether real expertise can protect you from the bias.
So what did they do?
They took a group of real estate agents, actual professionals, and a group of amateurs. And they gave everyone the exact same information packet for a house.
The size, the location, pictures, comparable sales in the area, everything.
Everything was identical except for one thing, the listing price. They varied that anchor from about $120,000 up to about $150,000.
A $30,000 spread.
Yep. And for the amateurs, the results were, well, predictable. Raising the list price by $30,000 raised their estimate of what the house was worth by almost $31,000.
They were just completely captured by the anchor.
Completely. But the really shocking part was the experts, the real estate agents.
They're trained to ignore the asking price. They're supposed to look at the comps, the objective data.
And when you asked them, that's what they said they did. They denied using the anchor. They insisted they relied only on the data.
What?
But their actual appraisals, their final numbers, tracked the anchors almost perfectly. They were absolutely swayed by it, even while consciously denying it.
How is that even possible if they're looking at the same set of comps?
Because the anchor influences how you interpret the comps. Comps are never a perfect match. There's always ambiguity. Is this renovation worth $10,000 or $15,000? Is this neighborhood better?
So the high anchor makes you unconsciously look for the positive details in the comps to justify it.
Precisely. It acts like a gravity well, pulling your subjective interpretation of all those ambiguous facts upwards.
This has to have huge implications for things like lawsuits, right? Where a lawyer asks for some crazy amount of money.
Huge. And it goes against the conventional wisdom, which is that if you ask for $1 billion gazillion dollars, you'll create a boomerang effect and the jury will punish you.
But the research doesn't support that.
Very little support for it. Poundstone cites an experiment by Chapman and Bornstein where they gave mock jurors a lawsuit and varied the damage request from $100 all the way up to $1 billion.
And the $1 billion anchor worked.
It worked. The outrageously high anchors still resulted in significantly higher awards. The jury's being asked to do an impossible task, translate a feeling like suffering onto a dollar scale. They have no idea what that scale should be.
So they look to the lawyer for the anchor.
They look for a starting point. And a high starting point, even an absurd one, leads to a much higher final number after they adjust down.
The lesson is crystal clear then. In any negotiation, any price discussion, try to be the one who sets that first number.
Always set the anchor.
All right, so we've seen how the first number shapes our reality. Now let's move from cognition to emotion. Lesson 3 is all about prospect theory.
And this is where we see that money isn't just math. It's deeply, deeply emotional.
And the central idea here is loss aversion.
Loss aversion. Another concept from Tversky and Kahneman. It's based on two key insights. First, we judge value relative to a starting point, our status quo.
And
Second, we treat losses and gains very, very differently.
And there's a specific ratio, right? The pain of a loss is how much more powerful.
It's psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Losing $50 hurts far more than finding $50 feels good.
There's a great little classroom riddle that shows how our perception of money isn't linear.
Yes, from S.S. Stevens. It shows that money works like our other senses, like sound or light. You need more and more stimulus to get the same jump in subjective feeling.
What's the riddle?
Okay, so imagine you unexpectedly find $10. The question is, how much more money would it take to make you feel twice as happy as you do right now?
A rational linear answer would be another $10, so $20 total.
That's the logical answer, but when they actually ask people this, the average answer is around $40.
40. You need 4 times the cash to double the happiness.
Exactly, which shows we're actually less sensitive to changes in money than we think. You need a huge leap in cash to get a small bump in emotional reward.
And this nonlinear thinking is the key to understanding something called the endowment effect.
It's the absolute key. Richard Thaler coined the term back in 1980.
And the endowment effect is basically the idea that once you own something, you value it more.
Much more. Specifically, our selling price for an object is consistently about twice as high as our buying price for the exact same thing.
Why?
Because once you own it, that's your status quo. Giving it up is framed in your mind as a loss. And we hate losses.
The Super Bowl ticket survey is the perfect example of this in action.
It's just a fantastic illustration. Alan Kruger surveyed fans who had won Super Bowl tickets with a face value of $400.
Okay.
And he asked them 2 different questions. First, since you own this ticket, would you be willing to sell it for $3,000?
$3,000 for a $400 ticket.
Right. And over 90% of them said no. They refused to sell.
So they valued the experience of going to the game at more than $3,000. They didn't want to incur the loss of that experience.
Exactly. But then he asked the flip side question. If you had lost your ticket on the way to the stadium, would you be willing to pay $3,000 to buy a replacement?
And they all said,
Overwhelmingly, they said no. They would not pay that.
so wait a minute. The same person with the same ticket values it at more than $3,000 when they're selling.
But less than $3,000 when they're buying.
That's completely irrational.
It is. The ticket becomes priceless because there's no single rational number that can describe its value in both of those situations. It's all about the emotional framing of loss versus gain.
And this emotional framing is what leads us to something called transaction utility.
Right. This is when the feeling of the deal itself becomes more important than the actual usefulness of the item.
So you buy useless junk at a garage sale just because it feels like a sweet deal.
Exactly. The psychological pleasure of the bargain overrides the logic. And the reverse is also true. We'll deny ourselves things we actually need if we feel the price is a ripoff.
The classic example is always the hotel minibar.
The hotel minibar. You might be perfectly happy to pay $3 for a water bottle at a store, but paying $8 for that same bottle from the minibar feels like a violation.
It feels like you're being gouged.
And that emotional feeling of being ripped off is stronger than your rational need for water, so you go thirsty.
And this is the exact psychology that rebates exploit.
It is. Logically, a rebate makes no sense. Why would a store sell a printer for $200 with a $25 rebate instead of just selling it for $175?
So why do they?
Because the rebate reframes the transaction to play on our loss aversion.
How so?
If you buy the $200 printer, that $25 rebate is framed as a future gain, a windfall, and you become highly motivated to send in the paperwork because you fear losing that $25 if you don't.
So the fear of losing the rebate money is stronger than the simple appeal of a lower upfront price.
Much stronger. And of course, the companies love it because they profit from breakage, all the people who forget to mail it in, and slippage, the people who get the check but never cash it.
The whole system is just built on our emotional quirks, not on rational value. Okay, so when emotions are in charge, nothing seems to trigger them more than our sense of fairness.
Which takes us right to lesson 4, and the idea that the public has this deep, unwritten moral rule book for prices.
This comes from research in the 80s by Kahneman, Netsch, and Thaler.
Right. And for decades, economists just completely ignored fairness. In the rational model, all that matters is supply and demand. If demand is high, you raise the price. Simple.
But this research showed the public has a very different view. And breaking the rules can cause a huge backlash.
A huge backlash. They tested this with a few scenarios, and the snow shovel scenario is the most famous one.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So a hardware store normally sells snow shovels for $15. The morning after a massive, unexpected blizzard, the store raises the price to $20.
And they asked people if this was fair.
He did, and an overwhelming 82% of people said it was unfair.
So the cardinal rule seems to be, you can't increase your profit at my expense just because there's a surge in demand.
That is the core rule. You can't take advantage of the situation. But then they tested a variation.
What was the twist?
What if the store's supplier raised the price on them, and the store was just passing that increased cost along to the customer by charging $20?
And in that case?
In that case, people judged it as acceptable. It's all about the perceived intent. If you're just protecting your own margin, that's fine. If you're using high demand to expand your margin, that's unfair.
It's a huge double standard.
Yeah.
We accept market forces when they affect the seller, but not when they affect the buyer.
And companies use this perception to their advantage all the time, especially with wages and inflation.
How does that work?
Okay, imagine a town with 12% inflation. A company gives all its workers a 5% raise.
So in real terms, that's a 7% pay cut. Their buying power's gone down.
A real pay cut. But because it's framed as a raise, 78% of people in the study found it acceptable.
Now, compare that to a situation with zero inflation.
Right. Zero inflation. And the company announces a straight 7% wage cut. Now, 62% of people say that's grossly unfair.
Even though the economic outcome is identical.
It's identical, but the framing is everything. Poundstone calls inflation the Scroogish employer's best friend because it provides cover for these real wage cuts.
This obsession with fairness over rational self-interest is really put under the microscope with the ultimatum game.
Yes, the ultimatum game is where you see a complete break from the rational actor model.
So remind us of the setup. It's very simple.
Two strangers are given $10 to split. One person, the proposer, suggests a split. Let's say $7 for me, $3 for you.
And the other person, the responder, can either accept or reject the offer.
Right. If they accept, they get the money as proposed. If they veto it, nobody gets anything.
Now, a purely rational homo economicus should accept any offer greater than zero. $1 is better than nothing.
They should never reject free money. But that is not what happens. What happens is the most common offer across the globe is a fair 50-50 split. And when proposers get greedy, say an 8-2 split, responders start rejecting the offers.
They are actively choosing to get $0 just to prevent the other person from getting 8.
They are making an economic decision based on pure emotion, resentment, the willingness to punish unfairness, even at a cost to yourself.
The desire to punish is stronger than the desire for a small gain.
Exactly, but what's really interesting is how framing changes this.
What happened when they reframed it as a market transaction?
It all changed. When the proposer was called a seller and the responder was a buyer, the sellers got much greedier. They offered more unequal splits.
And the buyers, did they still reject them?
Not nearly as often. The buyers were much more likely to accept the high prices.
Why? What changed?
The social norm changed. Participants felt that in a store, a seller has a right to set their price, however high it is. It might be a high price, but it wasn't seen as unfair in the same moral way that a stingy split of found money was.
The context just completely rewrote the rules of fairness.
Completely. And Poundstone makes this incredible point that this whole sensitivity to fairness seems to be uniquely human.
Right, he talks about this study with chimpanzees.
The Max Planck Institute did a version of the game with chimps and raisins, and the chimps behaved exactly like the classical economic models predict.
They were the rational maximizers.
They were! They would happily accept 2 raisins, even if the other chimp took 8. They had no impulse to punish the other chimp for an unequal offer.
So the chimps are the true homo economicus.
They are, and we're the emotional ones who will literally light money on fire to make a point about justice.
From the power of fairness, let's go to our final lesson for this deep dive. The almost supernatural appeal of the word free.
The magic of zero. This goes back to prospect theory again, specifically something called the certainty effect.
The certainty effect.
It's the huge psychological gap between something being 99% probable and 100% certain. We disproportionately value absolute certainty.
And that same gap exists at the other end of the scale, between 1% and 0.
Exactly. And Dan Ariely's theory is that this is linked to regret. If you pay even 1 cent for something that turns out to be useless, you can feel a tiny bit of financial regret.
But if it's free?
If it's free, you can't regret spending money you didn't spend. So we overvalue the certainty of zero financial risk.
Free isn't just a low price, it's a totally different psychological category.
It's a reset button, and it can be used as a very powerful anchor.
Yeah.
Poundstone brings up that famous steakhouse in Amarillo.
The big Texan with the free 72-ounce steak.
Right. It's free, but only if you can eat the whole thing, plus all the sides, in under an hour. If you fail, the price is $72.
Which is a very high anchor for a meal.
A very high anchor. It's $1 an ounce. And it subtly makes every other steak on the menu seem much more reasonably priced by comparison.
But the best experiment showing the irrational pull of zero has to be the one with the chocolate.
The Hershey's Kiss versus the Lindt truffle. It's so elegant.
So, in the first round, what was the choice?
Students could choose between a Hershey's Kiss for 1 cent or a Lindt truffle for 14 cents.
And the truffle is the much better deal. It's a gourmet chocolate that usually costs 50 cents or more.
It's the clear, objective bargain. And as you'd expect, most of the students rationally chose the Lindt truffle.
Okay, so far so good.
But then they lowered both prices by just 1 cent. So the choice became a free Hershey's Kiss versus a 13-cent Lindt truffle.
The truffle is still a massive bargain. The relative value is basically the same.
Logically, it should be, but that's not what happened. The results flipped completely.
The free kiss became the popular choice.
Overwhelmingly. The magic of free completely wiped out the rational calculation that the truffle was still a superior product at a huge discount. Zero has this irrational gravity that a simple discount just can't compete with.
It really speaks to how arbitrary our sense of value is. And Poundstone connects this to the Tom Sawyer effect.
Right, from Mark Twain, where Tom convinces his friends that whitewashing a fence is a privilege they should pay him for.
The core idea being that we often have no idea if we should be paying for an experience or being paid to endure it.
We have no conviction at all, and the poetry reading study is the absolute proof of this.
Okay, so they had two groups of students.
Two groups. With group one, they first asked if they would pay $2 to attend a poetry recital.
And I'm guessing not many wanted to.
Only 3% said yes. But then they told that same group, okay, it's free. Now 35% wanted to go.
So for them, free was a good thing, a benefit.
For group one, the recital was framed as a potentially enjoyable activity. But then they went to group two. And they started by asking if they would attend the recital if they were paid $2.
Framing it as a chore.
Exactly. And 59% said yes, they'd do it for the money. But then the researcher said, okay, forget the $2 payment. The recital is now just free.
What happened to that 59%?
Only 8% were still interested.
Wait. So in one group, free attracted 35% of people. And in the other group, free only attracted 8% for the same event.
That's the entire point. The value of the poetry reading was completely constructed on the spot. It didn't have any intrinsic value.
For the first group, free meant a fun activity with no cost. For the second, it meant doing a chore for no pay.
The value was entirely based on that first arbitrary price context they were given.
It's just amazing how easily our convictions about what something is worth can be manipulated by a single number that someone else provides.
Our price cluelessness is just a constant.
So this deep dive into Poundstone's Priceless, it's painted a really startling picture of how our minds work with money.
We've gone through 5 incredibly powerful lessons.
And to recap them quickly, we saw that prices are fundamentally arbitrary, but they're also coherent, which means they can be manipulated by things like shrinkflation.
We saw that anchoring is this powerful, unconscious force. The first number you hear sets the terms for everything else, and it affects experts just as much as amateurs.
Then we cover the emotional side. Loss aversion makes us fear losses twice as much as we enjoy gains, which explains the appeal of rebates and the whole endowment effect.
And we saw how our sense of fairness can completely override rational self-interest, like in the ultimatum game. And finally, the almost magical, irrational pull of the price tag, free.
So what's the big takeaway for all of us, navigating this world of engineered prices?
Poundstone's conclusion is that we are, in his words, ratio-wise and price foolish. Every time you have to make a judgment about a price or a value, you are vulnerable to being manipulated by numbers you've just seen or heard.
So this knowledge isn't just interesting, it's a defense mechanism. It's an antidote.
It is. It forces you to stop and ask not, is this a fair price, but where did this number even come from? What anchor is it serving?
Poundstone says we're living on planet Algon, a place where absolute prices don't mean anything, only relative values matter.
If our sense of value is that fluid, that it can be influenced by our social security number or the color of a website.
Then the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. Given how easily your sense of value is constructed, what specific, seemingly irrelevant anchor are you ignoring right now? What number is secretly influencing your next big decision, whether it's a house, a car, or your own salary?
Find the anchor, and you start to find true control.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, follow up in this lesson. Let's continue next topic. We are diving deep today into one of the most fundamental areas of human behavior and commerce, price. This deep dive is built on the astonishing reality that most consumers, you, me, everybody, are often, price clueless.
That is the perfect term for it. I mean, our mission today is to really crack open the psychological architecture that underpins modern pricing strategies.
Right.
Our sources, and we're drawing heavily from the work of researchers like William Poundstone and other behavioral economists, they all reveal that the concept of fair value is incredibly unstable.
It's slippery.
It's very slippery, highly contingent, and crucially, it's easily engineered by those selling the goods.
So we're going to explore, 5 central lessons that dictate how value is constructed in your mind?
Exactly.
These lessons cover things like how the tiny difference between, say, $3.99 and $4 can radically boost sales, how adding a terrible option to a menu can steer you toward the second most expensive item, why your price memory is, frankly, almost useless.
Yeah, which is a scary thought.
It is. And how restaurants exploit eye-tracking data to maximize their profit. And finally, how understanding all these inherent biases gives a massive strategic advantage to the people setting the prices.
It's a truly fascinating look at how behavioral decision theory has, moved from academia directly into the boardroom. We're moving way beyond simple markup mathematics and into predictive psychology.
And to start this journey, we have to talk about deception. But it's the most subtle, quiet kind imaginable. We have to talk about the concept of the invisible price hike, and it's perfectly encapsulated by the story of Skippy peanut butter.
Oh, yeah. Price consultants, people like Frank Luby, often use this anecdote because it demonstrates, the ultimate strategic success in pricing.
Okay, so what happened?
Skippy redesigned its classic plastic jar. The old jar, you might remember, had a smooth bottom, and it held 18 ounces of product.
Right, a standard jar of peanut butter.
But the new jar, which looked structurally identical in height and width on the shelf, had a large indentation. A dimple pushed up into the bottom cavity.
I think I know where this is going.
That small design change allowed the company to drop the volume from 18 ounces down to 16.3 ounces. The physical change was, to the casual shopper, nearly undetectable.
And critically,
the price sticker on the shelf remained exactly the same.
This is the moment, right? By leaving the nominal price, the sticker price unchanged, Skippy achieved an invisible, non-confrontational 10% price increase.
Exactly. If they had just taken the old 18-ounce jar and raised the price from, say, $3.09 to $3.39, what would happen?
Well, regular shoppers would absolutely notice that change. They'd mentally flag it and probably switch to Jif or the store brand to save a little money.
Of course they would. But because our memory for package sizes and specific price points on things we buy all the time is so poor, the brain just registers the price tag as familiar and acceptable.
And this is the perfect illustration of our starting concept, right?
Okay.
This is lesson 8, coherent arbitrariness. This is the foundation of value.
It's the whole game.
Okay, let's unpack coherent arbitrariness, because it really is the linchpin that allows all these other pricing tricks to work. What are the 2 parts of this concept?
So the theory posits 2 core ideas that seem to contradict each other, but they actually define our market behavior. First, there's the arbitrariness.
Okay.
Consumers truly, fundamentally do not know what anything should cost. We lack an absolute internal metric for value. Prices, particularly the first time we see a price, are essentially arbitrary, made-up numbers.
So if a new gadget hits the market, my brain has no fixed data point telling it whether that gadget should cost $50 or $500.
Exactly. You are essentially clueless about the true economic value, which is, based on production costs, the supply chain, all of that. But, and this is the important part, here's where the coherent part kicks in.
Okay.
While absolute prices are unknown to us, our relative valuations are stable. They're coherent.
So if I decide that I prefer Skippy over Jif, even though I don't know the precise worth of either one, I'll maintain that preference, that coherence, even if both brands randomly raise their prices. as long as the ratio between them stays about the same.
Precisely. If you are willing to pay a 10% premium for brand X over brand Y today, you will likely maintain that 10% premium preference tomorrow, regardless of whether the base price has jumped by 20%.
So we're sensitive to the comparisons, not the absolute number.
You're sensitive to relative cues, yes, not absolute intrinsic worth. This means consumers are often walking the aisles, as some experts describe it, in a half-conscious daze, relying entirely on external cues to construct value.
And this explains why that invisible price hike is such a recommended strategy for price consultants, especially when dealing with high-volume, frequently purchased products like coffee, cereal, or peanut butter.
For these commodity items, price stability is critical to maintaining market share. The moment the sticker price changes, especially in a grocery store where the comparisons are right there,
the risk of a mass brand switch is huge.
It's very high. The consultants know that consumers generally look at the width and the height of a package on the shelf, but their memory for the exact volume, 16.3 ounces versus 18 ounces, it's short-lived and it's imprecise.
We saw Kellogg's do this exact thing on a massive scale.
Yes, in 2008, Kellogg's seamlessly introduced thinner boxes for major cereal brands like Cocoa Krispies, Fruit Loops, and Apple Jacks.
They just reduced the depth of the box.
Right. The consumer sees the width and the height and registers same size, same price. But the volume, and thus the per ounce price, has increased significantly without triggering any conscious alarm.
The memory of the actual package dimensions is just too fleeting to catch the deception.
It requires a level of detailed comparison shopping vigilance that, let's be honest, most people simply don't have the time or the inclination for. The average shopper just assumes stability.
And that assumption is precisely what is being exploited.
And since the true price is arbitrary, it has to be established by something. And this is where we transition directly into the most powerful psychological tool used in pricing: anchoring.
The numbers that establish those arbitrary prices are set using anchors, and often they're completely irrelevant ones.
That's the key.
This concept of anchoring is so foundational to behavioral economics. Let's go deep into Tversky and Kahneman's famous United Nations experiment to really understand the sheer power of an irrelevant number.
It's a truly astonishing study. They brought in college students and had them spin a carnival-style wheel of fortune.
Okay.
But the wheel was rigged to land on one of only two random numbers, 10 or 65. The students were then asked 2 questions about the percentage of African nations in the UN.
And the first question was just to compare, right?
Yes. Is the actual percentage higher or lower than the random number you just spun? And the second question was, what is your best estimate of that percentage?
And the results were just definitive.
Absolutely. For students who spun the low anchor, the number 10, their average estimate for the actual percentage of African nations in the UN was around 25%.
But for the group that got the high anchor?
The group that was randomly assigned the high anchor, 65, their average guess soared to 45%. That irrelevant random starting point exerted a massive magnetic pull on their final confident estimates.
What's so fascinating here is that the participants knew the number 10 or 65 was random. I mean, it was spun on a wheel, but they still couldn't ignore it.
Once you see the number, it becomes an unconscious starting point for your mental calculation. You can't unsee it.
And this leads to what you call the power of irrelevance.
Right. A psychologist named George Quattrone pushed this even further by using what he called wacko anchors.
Wacko anchors.
He asked people if San Francisco's average temperature was higher or lower than a ridiculous number, like 558 degrees Fahrenheit.
558 degrees, that's utterly absurd.
It is. But even knowing that 558 degrees is completely impossible and irrelevant, people who were primed with that absurdly high anchor still gave significantly higher final estimates for San Francisco's actual average temperature than the control group.
So anchoring is not a conscious, logical process.
Not at all. It's an unconscious mental process where the brain adjusts from a starting point, and that starting point fundamentally biases the entire estimation process, whether you want it to or not.
Okay, so if random numbers bias our guess about the UN or the temperature, how does this play out in high-stakes, real-world commerce where people are supposed to be rational, like buying a house? This takes us to anchoring in real estate.
Right. And this study, conducted by Margaret Neal and Gregory Northcraft, focused on separating the experts from the amateurs.
How do they do that?
They provided both real estate agents and amateur buyers with identical files on the exact same house. The only variable they changed was the listing price, which ranged from $119,900 up to $149,900.
So that $30,000 difference in the arbitrary listing price is the anchor point.
Precisely. For the amateur buyers, raising the listing price by $30,000 increased their average estimate of the home's value by nearly $31,000.
Wow, it was almost a dollar-for-dollar influence. The initial asking price fundamentally created the perceived value for the buyer.
It absolutely did. But here's the kicker. The agents, the supposed experts, the professionals trained to know true market value, surely they weren't swayed by a simple listing price.
You'd think not.
They were. But they performed this ritual of denial. When they were asked, the agents universally denied using the listing price as a factor. They insisted they only relied on comparable sales and intrinsic features of the house.
But the data told a different story.
The data showed otherwise. The agents' valuations were still significantly influenced by the arbitrary listing price, albeit slightly less so than the amateurs. They talked a better game, but they still succumbed to the unconscious pull of the anchor.
What's so interesting about that is the cognitive bias is so strong, it just overrides professional expertise. The agents believe they're making objective calculations.
Right.
But their initial exposure to that high anchor shifts the entire accepted range of credible prices upward without them even realizing it.
That is the crux of it. The study demonstrated that the zone of credible prices is far broader than even the experts imagine. And because anchoring is unconscious, you can't just choose to ignore it. The ability to resist its influence, even when you're warned about it, is extremely difficult. The first number you see sets the battlefield.
Okay, so we've established that value is arbitrary and easily anchored. Now, if we move from these foundational pricing mechanisms to the more visible everyday tricks, how do companies exploit that arbitrary valuation using simple visual mechanics? If our unconscious mind processes numbers this way, what is the most famous example of leveraging this cognitive shortcut? And that brings us perfectly to our next segment, the magic of the 9, or lesson 6.
Right, the charm price. It typically ends in 0.99 or 0.95, and it's often dismissed as, a cliche of cheap salesmanship.
Yeah, it feels a little old-fashioned.
It does, but it is one of the most rigorously tested and effective pricing strategies ever developed. The data is just overwhelming.
You mentioned an analysis of 8 different studies conducted over 17 years, from 1987 to 2004. What was the magnitude of the effect they found?
That aggregated data confirmed that charm prices boosted sales by an average of 24% relative to nearby whole dollar prices.
24%. That's not a marginal benefit. That is a massive, significant lift in consumer demand purely based on how the price is presented.
It's huge.
But hang on, the obvious first question is, isn't this just because the price is lower? I mean, $99 is lower than $10.
That was the initial assumption, of course, but researchers meticulously controlled for that. Anderson and Semester ran a definitive field experiment using a major mail-order company that sold women's clothing. They tested identical items at 3 price points: $34, $39, and $44.
Logically, if pure cost was the driver, $34 should have the highest sales.
It did not. The $39 price point significantly boosted sales compared to both the $34 and the $44 option.
I'm out of here.
It's true. The difference in sales between $34 and $44 was statistically insignificant.
So that means the charm price, the specific use of the 9 ending, was the active psychological driver, not just the lower numerical value.
Exactly.
That's a powerful demonstration. So we have to conclude that the penny difference between $39 and $40 is negligible, but the psychological difference is enormous. What is the mechanism? What explains this?
Well, this is attributed to the left-digit bias hypothesis. Our brains, which are designed for speed and efficiency, process numerical magnitude extremely quickly. So when we encounter a number sequence like 399...
So 3 is what we see first.
Right. The leftmost digit, the 3, dominates our initial mental registration. We anchor on it immediately.
And before the rest of the numbers even register consciously, the price is anchored psychologically closer to $3 than to $4.
Precisely. This is particularly true in retail environments where people are scanning prices quickly and operating under, a lot of cognitive load. The small physical distance between the 3 and the 9 on the price tag creates a massive psychological chasm in perceived value.
It makes perfect sense. It's a shortcut. We grab the first piece of information and run with it, assuming the digits that come after are less important.
And beyond that, the charm price also acts as a subtle signal of quality or strategy. It tells you, the customer, about the retailer's identity.
How does it do that? How does a 99-cent ending tell me about the store's strategy?
Well, it signifies a bargain. It signals value shopping.
Yeah.
So high-end, upscale retailers like a Nordstrom or a luxury boutique, they actively avoid charm prices because they want to signal quality, exclusivity, and prestige. If you see a $49,999 item, it sort of cheapens the product.
Right.
Those retailers prefer the rounded $50,000 price because it signals stability and confidence in the item's intrinsic value.
So using a charm price can actually work against you if you're selling prestige or luxury goods, because it activates the wrong mental script in the consumer's head. The cheap bargain hunter script.
Exactly. And conversely, some retailers use the charm price to signal something else entirely. Costco, for example, famously uses 97-cent endings, not 99.
I have noticed that. What does that mean?
It's a code. It specifically signals that an item is discontinued, it's on clearance, or it's slow-moving stock. If you're a Costco regular, you learn this code, and the price tells you something specific about the item's future availability and its current status.
So whether it's intentional or not, the price becomes its own language, communicating much more than just the dollar amount. This exploitation of relative value and arbitrary perception, it takes us to the ultimate extreme, the price of zero.
Yes. The perception of value, which is already shaky, becomes radically distorted around zero. This relates directly to the certainty effect that comes out of prospect theory.
The certainty of a gain is overvalued.
Hugely overvalued. When something is free, you eliminate all risk of regret.
Right. If I buy a product for $5 and I hate it, I regret spending $5. If I get the same product for free and hate it, I regret nothing.
That certainty of zero cost casts a literal magic spell, often leading consumers to overvalue free items substantially, even if the item itself has very little intrinsic value. This was brilliantly demonstrated in the famous poetry reading experiment conducted by behavioral scientist Dan Ariely.
The Dan Ariely experiment really drives home how framing constructs worthlessness. Walk us through the two groups.
So the premise was simple. Gauge students' willingness to attend a poetry reading. The control group was asked if they would pay $2 to hear Walt Whitman recited.
And I'm guessing not many wanted to.
Unsurprisingly, only a tiny fraction, about 3%, agreed. But then they were told the event was actually free, and interest jumped dramatically to 35%.
Okay, so the framing shift from a small cost to no cost was perceived as a significant gain.
Right. But the critical twist came with the second group.
What happened with them?
The second group was first asked if they would be willing to attend the recital if they were paid $2.
That's a different frame entirely.
A completely different frame. And a comfortable majority, 59%, said yes, they'd go if they were paid. However, when they were then informed that the event was going to be free, meaning they wouldn't receive the $2 payment,
their interest must have dropped.
It plummeted to a meager 8%.
Wow, that is profound. The final product was identical, a free poetry reading, but the initial frame of reference flipped the value perception completely.
The initial frame established the event's underlying value. For that second group, the poetry reading was initially framed as a chore meriting pay, a negative utility experience that's compensated by $2.
And when the $2 vanished?
The negative utility remained, and the event was overwhelmingly rejected, even though it cost them nothing. They were trained to believe the event had negative worth. This proves that consumers often fail to recognize true worthlessness when they see it, especially when the price is framed advantageously.
That makes the shift from $3.99 to $4 seem almost gentle compared to the shift around zero. So if we are so susceptible to external anchors and relative comparisons, that leads us perfectly into the complexity of choice in our next segment, decoys and steering choices, which is lesson 7.
Right. Once you accept that consumer value is arbitrary, the pricing goal shifts from setting a fair price to engineering the choice environment.
You're steering the consumer.
You're steering the consumer toward the most profitable option, and decoys are the primary tool for this.
Okay, so decoys are these third options that are specifically designed not to sell well, but to manipulate the market share of the existing options. Let's dive into the mechanics of this with the famous Duke University attraction effect in Veer study.
This study is a textbook example of how a seemingly irrelevant option can hijack rationality. Students were initially offered two choices. You have option A, a bargain beer for $1.80, rated 50 on quality.
Okay.
And you have option B, a premium beer for $2.60, rated 70 on quality. In a head-to-head comparison, students generally preferred the premium beer B by about a 2-to-1 margin.
So if the retailer's goal is to increase the market share of the desired option, say option A, the bargain beer, how do you do that?
You introduce a clearly inferior dominated decoy. They added option C, a super cheap decoy for $1.60 with a quality of 40.
So it's worse on both price and quality than the bargain beer.
Exactly. Nobody wanted to buy the super cheap bad-tasting beer C, but its presence on the menu changed the perceived value of A. Decoy C, by being demonstrably worse, made the original bargain beer A look suddenly reasonable. It looked high quality for the price and like a safe choice. The market share for A rose dramatically to 47%. The decoy successfully shifted choices downscale.
And if the goal was the opposite, to shift market choices upscale and boost sales of the premium option, B,
you introduce a high-priced decoy. So they removed C and added decoy D, a super premium beer for $3.40 with a quality rating of 75.
So only marginally better than B, but way more expensive.
Significantly more expensive, and the result was staggering. 90% of students chose the original premium beer, B, and almost nobody wanted the bargain beer anymore.
So the decoy D made B look like a compromise, a rational middle ground. The principle at work here is the trade-off contrast.
The decoy provides a simple, non-taxing comparison point. When the choices are complex, consumers gravitate towards the option that offers the best apparent trade-off or compromise. By introducing an undesirable third option, the retailer makes the middle option feel like the safe bet.
The intelligent choice.
The intelligent choice, yeah. It maximizes its perceived value without changing its actual price 1 cent.
This principle is so effective, it gave rise to maybe the most famous retail anecdote in pricing psychology.
Yeah.
The William Sonoma bread maker.
A classic. So William Sonoma initially launched a high-end bread maker priced at $279. And sales were, frankly, mediocre.
People looked at it and decided the price was too high for a novelty kitchen item.
Exactly. The $279 price point was failing to anchor perceived value correctly. So what was the solution?
Introduce a decoy.
They introduced a second, much larger bread maker model, priced substantially higher at $429. The purpose of this $429 model wasn't to generate high-volume sales.
Its job was to be a high-priced decoy.
It was an anchor that redefined the baseline of what an expensive bread maker could cost.
And the result was that sales of the original $279 model,
they nearly doubled. It was a huge success. The $429 machine suddenly made the $279 model look like a steal, a smart purchase, and a highly desirable compromise. The expensive model was an inferior choice designed to boost sales of the cheaper, yet still high-margin machine.
It sounds almost too simple to be effective, but the data is just undeniable. The presence of the inferior option makes the targeted option shine. And this tactic reaches its maximum expression in the high-end retail sector, often referred to as shilling for luxury.
Absolutely. When you walk into a Prada or a Hermes store, you encounter items that are priced at levels that seem designed solely to shock.
Like the $330,000 diamond-encrusted watch.
Or the $7,000 limited edition handbag, or some outrageously expensive piece of conceptual art. These items are rarely intended for mass purchase, or even purchase at all.
They function as extreme contrast anchors.
They do. They are part of the store's marketing budget, just like paying for expensive window displays or advertising. Their sole function is to create a very high reference point.
So when you see that $7,000 handbag,
the $2,000 handbag right next to it, which still carries an enormous profit margin, looks like a comparative bargain.
So the retailer is actively trying to invoke a mixture of emotions in the shopper.
Yes, the consultant's strategy is often described as creating a mixture of anger and happiness.
Anger and happiness.
Anger because the extreme items are financially inaccessible, followed immediately by happiness because the mid-range item, that $2,000 bag, is suddenly obtainable and feels like a massive discount compared to the extreme anchor.
You feel like a smart shopper for choosing the relative bargain.
Exactly.
The psychological architecture here is truly sophisticated. It moves value creation away from the intrinsic worth of the product and focuses it entirely on the context and framing provided by the items next to it.
And this architecture is applied everywhere that prices are presented in a group, which brings us to one of the most organized and detailed applications of price psychology. Segment 4, Menu Engineering and Managing Perception, Lesson 9.
Right. Restaurant menus are often described as the most profitable 3 pieces of paper a business owns. This isn't just about listing food. This is advanced menu science. And it utilizes eye-tracking data, font psychology, strategic placement, particularly in large chains like Chili's, Olive Garden, and Applebee's.
The first rule of menu engineering, according to the industry consultants, is to eliminate the single biggest mistake that most amateur restaurants make.
But what's that?
Listing the prices in a column.
Why is a column format so detrimental to profit?
Because it instantly turns the menu into a price list. A column encourages the diner to scan downwards, comparing items strictly by cost and inevitably choosing the cheapest item.
And the cheapest item is often what they call a plow horse.
Yes, an item that's highly popular but yields a very low profit margin. The menu must actively discourage decision-making based purely on price.
So what techniques do they use to suppress those price-based choices?
Well, one method is price insertion rather than listing. Prices are often listed directly after the description or even embedded into the description without the dollar sign.
The dollar sign itself is a trigger.
It's a psychological cue that activates the part of the brain associated with financial pain. Studies have shown that simply removing the dollar sign can increase total spending by 8%.
That's incredible. Just removing a symbol that everyone knows the meaning of alters purchasing behavior.
It's all about reducing the cognitive friction associated with spending money. But the most important element is strategic placement and high anchors. Menu consultants have used eye-tracking studies to determine the prime menu space.
And where does the diner's eye land first?
Typically, the eye darts immediately to the upper right-hand corner of the menu. This area, known as the sweet spot, is reserved for the items the restaurant most wants to sell.
High-profit items or price anchors?
Exactly. And this is where we see the most audacious anchoring, like the infamous $1,000 omelet or the ridiculously priced ultra-rare wine pairing.
These items, which may sell once a year, are purely strategic.
They exist not for their sales volume, but to reset the diner's sense of acceptable spending. Placing a $150 foie gras burger or a $1,000 truffle bagel acts as an anchor that bewitches customers into spending more than they would have on the rest of the menu.
So when a customer looks at the $1,000 omelet and then sees the $65 filet mignon, the $65 entree suddenly seems palatable, even reasonable.
Look at the Balthazar example we referenced. They strategically placed the enormous $110 Le Balthazar seafood plate to act as an anchor.
And that prompts customers to jump to the nearby and much more modest $65 Le Grand plate.
Exactly. The anchoring effect makes the $65 plate feel like a sensible compromise, even though that is likely the most profitable target sale for the restaurant.
Menu science also employs these clever methods to manage size perception and increase the total ticket size through techniques like bracketing and bundling.
Bracketing is key for expensive entrees like steak. They're often presented in 2 size options. A very large, expensive option, and a smaller, slightly less expensive option.
The large size is the anchor.
It's too much food and it's too much money. But its presence makes the smaller size feel like the appropriate, attractive choice.
Which, in reality, is the size the restaurant wanted to sell at the price they always intended to charge.
Precisely. The price of the smaller size seems reasonable because it's bracketed by the ridiculously oversized, expensive alternative. It's all about creating a positive relative comparison.
And then there's bundling, the combo meal strategy.
The fast food combo. By selling several items, burger, soda, and fries together for a supposed bargain, the retailer slightly discounts the third item.
And that discount makes you order the extra item.
It incentivizes the customer to order the fries, which they might have skipped ordering a la carte. The customer perceives they got a bargain or a positive transaction utility, but the overall gross profit for the restaurant increases because the total number of items ordered has increased.
That concept of positive transaction utility is key here. It's the psychological benefit you get from the feeling of getting a good deal, separate from the actual economic utility of the goods you received.
Absolutely. The feeling of saving money on the fries, even if the entire bundle is still overpriced, provides the necessary emotional justification for the purchase.
This systematic use of psychological architecture brings us to our final segment, Segment 5. Pricing advantageously, leveraging cognitive biases. Lesson 10. And it seems like companies are increasingly making their pricing structures more complicated to optimize their profits.
The complexity itself is now a deliberate feature. Sophisticated companies devise nonlinear pricing structures, complex billing tiers, variable rates, hidden fees all, to extract the maximum willingness to pay from each consumer.
And the goal is simple. Make comparison shopping difficult.
Make it difficult and make predicting the final cost nearly impossible. When you face this difficulty, choosing a plan becomes a judgment under uncertainty, and that opens the door to cognitive biases.
The phone bill is the perfect example of pricing complexity as a feature. No one truly knows the exact cost of their plan until the bill arrives.
Right. With varying peak and off-peak minutes, complex billing intervals, data usage tiers, the sheer volume of variables overwhelms the consumer's ability to calculate the best option. And this confusion feeds directly into the flat rate bias.
We strongly prefer simple, flat rates like unlimited plans, even if we suspect they might not be the cheapest option for our usage profile.
The preference stems from the desire to eliminate financial uncertainty. A flat rate provides psychological security. But data shows this comes at a tremendous premium.
How much of a premium?
A 2009 study examining San Diego cell phone users found that light users who chose flat rate plans paid a staggering average of $3.02 per minute overall for their calls.
$3.02 a minute, purely for the psychological relief of not having to track their usage. That's a massive premium for peace of mind.
It is. The fear of uncertainty and the dread of surprise overage charges are strong enough motivators to prompt people to willfully choose the economically less efficient option. The price is built not on cost, but on managing anxiety.
Moving on to framing, we need to discuss how the structure of a gain versus a loss dramatically influences decisions. This is the cornerstone of loss aversion from prospect theory.
Loss aversion confirms that losses hurt psychologically much more, roughly twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. There is a deep psychological chasm between the certainty of a gain or loss and the mere probability of one.
This fundamental principle is what makes rebates such a magical and frankly nonsensical sales tool. Logically, a rebate makes no sense. Why would I buy a $200 printer with a $25 rebate when I could just buy an identical printer for $175 up front?
Because the initial $200 price acts as a psychological anchor. It often signals quality or a higher perceived value. The subsequent rebate is then framed as a separate certain gain, a silver lining, or a windfall that feels like a delightful bonus.
It provides immense positive transaction utility.
Exactly. The consumer feels like they are winning by receiving the $25 rather than losing money by having to pay $25 more up front.
The emotional pull of the perceived gain outweighs the rational choice to save the money immediately.
That's the core psychological trick. And furthermore, the emotional reaction to not sending in the rebate form is framed as a loss. The loss of a promised $25 windfall, which is a more painful psychological event than the mild inconvenience of filling out the form.
And the whole mechanism relies heavily on the cynical reality of breakage and slippage terms the industry actually uses internally.
Rebate programs thrive on this uncollected money. Breakage refers to unredeemed rebates customers who bought the item but never sent in the form or the UPC code.
And slippage.
Slippage refers to checks that were mailed out but never cashed. Both result in free money for the client company.
And the process is often intentionally designed to increase that breakage and slippage.
Absolutely. The forms are complicated. They often require UPC codes to be cut from the box, which makes returns difficult. The instructions are frequently complex and confusing, and the checks themselves. The rebate checks themselves are often mailed in unmarked, plain envelopes that look exactly like junk mail, strategically increasing the chance that the customer will simply throw the check away.
It is truly stunning how much money is generated simply by exploiting the consumer's willingness to jump through friction-filled hoops for a perceived future gain, even when the upfront cost is higher.
And the gain is so easily ignored or discarded. The final strategic takeaway here is that the modern pricing landscape is fundamentally about psychological architecture.
It's everywhere.
Companies are constantly devising complex, non-linear pricing structures, from streaming service tiers to rail discount cards, from infomercial structures to airline bundles, not just to cover costs, but to extract the maximum willingness to pay from each consumer segment.
The goal, almost paradoxically, is that everyone pays according to their ability to pay, often without realizing the psychological levers being pulled. The customer pays what feels right.
And what feels right is what the price architect wants them to feel.
What stands out to me here is just the profound gap between our self-perception and our reality. We assume that because we know a price is arbitrary or irrelevant, like a high anchor price or a random number, it can't possibly influence us.
But the speed and the unconscious nature of our mental machinery ensures that those numbers, once seen, become a persistent factor in constructing our perception of value. Rationality just fails to override the emotional and psychological pull of the numbers.
The denial is the ultimate defense mechanism, but the data proves that we are easily anchored, swayed by relative comparisons, and often fooled by a simple 9. The psychological game is already in play before we even make the conscious choice.
So the question is, now that you know the rules, can you see the decoys? Can you resist the anchor?
The next time you see a price ending in 99 cents, or that ridiculous $500 item prominently displayed on a menu, ask yourself, is this price tag designed to sell this item? Or is it a hidden decoy number designed to make something cheaper next to it feel like the intelligent choice? Thank you for watching. Do not forget like, share, subscribe, follow up in the next video.